Welcome. My name is Sharon Bonney. I'd like to welcome you to COABE's webinar, Ensuring Immigrants Access to WIOA Data and Advocacy Tools for Adult Education. And before we get started, I have just a few slides here I wanted to get through. I wanted to let everybody know that all webinar participants will receive a certificate of attendance, which can be used for CEU verification. That will come to you tomorrow in an e-blast that will be sent out. Additionally, everything that's shared here on this webinar will post to the COAB website along with the archived recording of this webinar. Additionally, you can download resources from this webinar and previous webinars from our Adult Educators Repository, which is located on the COAB website. And I'd like to remind you all to join us at the National Conference this year, April 2nd through the 5th in Orlando, Florida. Also, at this point, right now, we're right in the process of our Board of Directors elections, and anyone that's a member of COAB can vote. So just want to encourage all members, go to coab.org and let us know who you'd like to be your next president and secretary and regional rep for your region. Before I turn this over to our wonderful sponsor, I just also want to mention that we have a State Association Leadership Webinar on February 27th. And all state association leaders can register at coab.org. This is through a joint partnership with the state directors. And with that, I would like to now turn this over to our sponsor, Burlington English. Robert Breitbart of Burlington English is our sponsor.
Hello, Sharon and everyone there. Thank you so much. It's super nice to be with you. We have a great webinar today. And as Sharon was mentioning, looking forward to seeing everyone there at COAB in our neck of the woods, in our home state of Florida, in Orlando. Well, without further ado, I know it's grant season right now, and so many folks are looking for ways to meet these new WIOA guidelines. And I'd say, well, you've come to the right place. In my more than 20 years, dating back to almost 1990 in adult education, particularly in adult ESL and high school equivalency, I've never seen a more exciting time of people stretching and looking for solutions. And I can tell you that Burlington English can be a very big part of that. Many of you know the more than 50 courses and mini courses offered through Burlington English. Those also include new elements for digital literacy. And also, as you can see on my screen towards the top of my portfolio part, and that my portfolio is a really critical element of our Burlington career pathways. This is for learners of all levels in ESL and to integrate career pathways into everything that they're learning. So we're talking contextualized English language acquisition, along with a WIOA focus of life after ESL and high school equivalency into the worlds of work and post-secondary education. It's in beginning, intermediate, and advanced. And as you can see, the lessons topics are parallel across all three levels. So perfect for open entry, open exit, as well as managed enrollment and even multi-level classes. Many of you also know the more than, as I was mentioning, more than 40 career courses, career modules that we have. Everything from a day in the life of the job, getting the job, the vocabulary needed to succeed on that job, and role play. And I think what people are seeing now as they're filling out their grants is that this is a phenomenal way to get all students at all levels preparing and readying for choices that they may make coming up in i.e. integrated education and training offerings. So this is a way that you can prime all of your ESL students at all levels to be ready to make great choices in IET and succeed once they're in there. As you can see, this is a wonderful way for them to explore careers in all the 16 Department of Labor career clusters, as well as everything that you would want to do as far as you can see, what a career counselor would work with someone about me, getting a job, on-the-job education and training. Everything as we're talking about integrating with our Title I, with our one-stop American Job Center partners, this gets us perfectly aligned with that. And even down to a level of getting to know a particular job, the insides and outs. I have a dental cleaning next week, so I picked this one for them. So again, all of this can be found at burlingtonenglish.com at the Contact Us page, please feel free, reach out to us. We'd love to provide a brief demonstration of everything that you've seen here. And again, as proud supporters of COABE, looking forward to this session. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Sharon Bunny. Thank you.
Great, Robert, thank you so much. And now, without further ado, I'd love to introduce everybody to Margie McHugh. Margie will be our featured presenter today.
Oh, great. Thanks, Sharon. Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you, and we're really so pleased to be able to be part of this COABE series. I'm going to, did I already take, oh, I'm going to take myself off video and use, just try and have the full screen so that folks can really take in a lot of the data and other things that are on the slides here. And then I'll return by video for the end of the webinar. But so let me say that first of all, I'll be trying to focus primarily on mainly on Title I and Title II services under the law, figuring that that's really probably the center of interest for folks who have joined us. Now I'm trying to advance the slides and they're not moving, so give me 1 second to figure that out. Sorry, we're just going to reopen and see if that works. There we go. Okay, so Sharon, can you hear me? We're having a problem we didn't have the first time around in terms of advancing the slides.
Hey, Margie, I can hear you. Usually if you just click with your mouse to next slide, that usually works.
Do we have keyboard control?
You do. You have complete control of the slide.
There we go. All right. So hopefully that'll be our only technical glitch. So I'll just say, for those of you who don't know us already, I'm with the Migration Policy Institute's National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy. We're based in Washington, D.C. And these issues around adult education and workforce training are very much a part of the core of our work here. We have a very big focus on policies and practices that help immigrants and their children join the mainstream of U.S. society and the workforce. And so working all the way through the education pipeline, we actually see many, many issues related to the ability of immigrant parents and immigrant and refugee individuals more generally needing to access adult education and or workforce services in order to fully integrate into society. Our work in adult education and workforce more specifically in the last few years has focused primarily on convening key stakeholders to help them consider the impacts of the new Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and also analyzing policy and data in that arena, and trying to create electronic resources around those policy issues that we see surrounding us as a result of the law, and you'll hear more about those today. I want to say, too, that I'm joined here in DC by my colleague Madeline Borofsky, who's an associate policy analyst here at MPI, and who's worked very closely with me on all of the work I'm about to present. And she'll be helping me, too, with trying to keep track of the questions you may ask during the webinar, and we may wind up tag teaming in terms of answering them at the end. So please send in your questions. You all are probably familiar with this platform. You can send them in through the Q&A function that you see on your screen at any time. So to set the overall context, this probably goes without saying given the background of all of you who are on the webinar, but obviously adult education and workforce services are critical to the integration of immigrants First of all, there's an extremely large number of immigrants and refugees who settle in the U.S. each year. Many of them are limited in their English proficiency and or their underlying levels of education. So English, adult ed, skill training and the like are critical to helping many of them achieve what we've now come to refer to as civic, economic, and linguistic integration. For those of you who followed the work of the White House Task Force on Immigrant Integration that President Obama set in motion back in 2014, this frame of supporting immigrants' civic, economic, and linguistic integration has been very much in use at the federal level the last several years. And you can see how all of the important work that adult educators do maps very easily onto that frame. Unfortunately, though, adult ed and particularly workforce training systems have a very weak record of meeting immigrant and refugee needs. Title I funds under the Workforce Investment Act and now under WIOA have generally been off limits to folks who are limited English proficient. You can see there that only 1.5% of those who were served by Title I training programs were limited English proficient. So there's a long way to go for the current system to be able to meet those needs. Also, adult education has traditionally not been funded at anywhere near the level that would meet needs of the large number of individuals who require those services. And then, as many of you were aware, particularly during the periods of the period of the Great Recession, those funds dropped in many states and have not yet rebounded. Sharon, I hear a fair amount of feedback. Do you think that's something I can do anything about here? All right, I'll just keep going.
I just fixed that, sorry.
Okay, no problem. All right, so then just very briefly, for those of you who do not always deal with the new WIOA law, I'll just say very briefly that that one of the key areas of focus you'll hear from me today is on Title I, which is the piece of the law that includes workforce training programs. They fall into the three categories you see there on the screen: adult, dislocated worker, and youth programs. And you'll see that when I start to walk through some of the data resources we have available, that that we sort of align a lot of our analysis with some of the key characteristics of folks who are supposed to be targeted by their programs. Where adult ed has traditionally fallen is under Title II, previously known as the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act. And I'm sure all of you know that that's the part of the law that provides federal funding under a federal-state partnership system for adult basic education programs, including high school equivalency and English acquisition classes. And then maybe this is well known, but Title I, under Title I workforce training programs, those are restricted to those who have work authorization here in the U.S., whereas Title II is silent on immigration status. It doesn't address it, and we can talk more about that if a little bit later if folks have questions. So I would say that arguably the most important change under WIOA for adult education was that the measures that had traditionally been required for Title I workforce programs are now mandatory for use with Title II programs. So, you know, many of you already were familiar with these the performance measures related, for example, to participants being in unsubsidized employment. Many of you tracked that already after they had exited adult ed programs. Some information on median earnings was often collected. But now under the law, there are these six mandatory performance measures that you see up on the screen. And obviously, first of all, the big change is that these are mandatory, and states' performance is not only judged against them for both all Title I and Title I and Title II programs, but also governors now face a financial penalty if their performance doesn't meet up with those with what has been agreed upon or set by the federal government. So there's now a financial penalty on top of the mandatory application of these performance measures to Title II programs. And so obviously, I think this is a big conversation out in the field, that adult learners, first of all, this very much has echoes of No Child Left Behind, this idea that states are going to lose their money if their performance lags. And so that was controversial even in the mandatory K-12 system. To apply it now to a set of programs that do not require mandatory attendance by participants is already a pretty big leap. But then even when you look at these actual measures, the fact that so many of them are focused on employment and or post-secondary transition raises a lot of concerns about folks who are lower educated or not seeking employment, because we very much expect that what's happened now with the financial penalties will make systems much more worried about serving individuals that can't help them meet all of these performance measures. And so number 5 there, the percentage of participants who in a program year are in an education or training program that leads to post-secondary credential or employment, or who are achieving measurable skill gains, that's really the sweet spot for most adult ed programs, and the one where they are most used to being able to meet the performance measures. I think what's different now is that states might be dinged for the lack of performance in any of the other areas, and that that this has just become a very, very big concern in terms of the viability of programs and or the sort of creaming that might result from states trying to make sure that they're not in danger of not meeting performance measures and therefore losing funding. So I'll speak a little bit more about this later, but responding to the criticism that this might really make that this would make potentially make services off limits to people who could not quickly show these kinds of results for programs. There was a provision put in the law, particularly related to Title I services, saying that there would be a priority of service for individuals who were, among other things, basic skills deficient. But we'll get back to that as we get a little further in the conversation here, because the way that's been implemented, it's not really of immediate use to many of us right now, because it was implemented in such a loose way. So just very quickly, I'll summarize by saying that the starting point, at least from our point of view, is that as states try to avoid financial penalties for failing to meet their performance target, the law's focus on post-secondary transition and completion, it could drive services toward first and second generation immigrant youth, because many of them are better prepared. They have a higher level of underlying education and might be able to help states look good, in a sense, in terms of serving them and helping them meet those outcomes. But what the real worry is that at the same time, it could drive services away from people who are lower educated, low levels of limited English proficiency, certainly parents of young children, because many of those parents do not have an immediate goal of employment and might not be in line for making the high wages that might be required of different states in terms of their plans that have been approved by the federal government, and also citizenship applicants who traditionally had been served well by many adult education programs. All of the goals of those adult learners and also their lower levels of education in many cases would make them a pretty risky bet for states to serve in their adult ed programs. So the bet that we've made in consultation with many of you who are leaders in the field was that our best defense coming into this environment would be to provide data that would really that would make apparent for state elected officials and policymakers the dangers hidden in the law that are not visible unless the state is really looking add a profile of the socio-demographic characteristics of who would otherwise be eligible or one would expect to have served by these systems, and then try and use that to motivate policymakers to step up to the plate on making sure that they address some of these concerns and ensure that there's equitable access to Title I and Title II services. So what did we do? In consultation with a number of state directors, both on the workforce side, adult ed side, and also many of you who are working in the front lines of the field, one of the main products we produced was a pretty massive socio-demographic analysis that compared foreign-born and native-born individuals at the national level in the 20 top states for immigrant settlement, and also the top 25 counties in the country, comparing characteristics, what we call WIOA relevant characteristics, and then giving an explanation sort of table by table with these various characteristics, saying how it mapped onto the law. So I'd invite you all to maybe look those up as we're talking now. And an easy way to find them also is to just Google McHugh Immigrants WIOA, and you'll be able to find that page right there. And then we also very recently put together a national and 30-state analysis of the characteristics of parents of young children, comparing native and foreign-born, trying to I guess, just make more prominent for folks who are in the early childhood field, in the dual generation field, to show them that there's a real danger here now with the passage of WIOA and its implementation in terms of the loss of an on-ramp in many cases through parent-focused adult education programs, and really trying to show them the data on families with parents of young children, and how immigrant and refugee families really need to be a focus in a different way within that dual generation field. So those you could find. You can Google McHugh dual generation data, and you can find the various fact sheets there if you want to just be looking at something that's tailored to your own state while we're going through these various tables here. So in terms of the WIOA fact sheet, the main one that I'm going to walk through here during the webinar is the national fact sheet that we put together. And basically, I would say overall that these fact sheets are a way to say to policymakers that immigrant and LEP individuals are overrepresented among those who should be being served under the law, and that there really is a concern about whether the law is going to be implemented in a way that provides equitable access to these populations. Here's the list of the states for which we have the WIOA fact sheets, and then it's this set of states plus another 10 for the parents of young children fact sheets. But those, I would say the more extensive fact sheets are the WIOA ones, just because they deal with the entire adult population in each state. If you want other geographies, if we haven't run numbers for you, I would say, first of all, just write to us. You'll see my email and Madeline's at the end of this presentation. We actually have more data than we published online, but just because once you get past a certain level of population in certain counties, it's just hard to fill out all of the cells in the table. But we may have more data that would be useful to you, so feel free to approach us about that. You also can always look at the Census Bureau's Fact Finder, and you'll see on there that you can insert your desired geography, and that you'll find some valuable information, not as much as what we're able to give you in our fact sheets, but you certainly can find some information that you can use in the ways that we're going to describe here. So turning to, I'm just going to quickly go through a few of the main tables so that you can get the flavor sort of what are some of the things that you might want to use these fact sheets for, and that I can say many people already have. A lot of the folks we've been working with have already used these data when they've testified before some of their local workforce investment boards, written letters to their governors, their state adult ed directors, et cetera, et cetera. So for this age and gender and origin table, that's what we start all the fact sheets with. You can see here that one of the compelling arguments for folks is that, sorry, for policymakers, is that almost always a higher share of foreign-born individuals is in the working age bands. And so, so the idea that these are important populations to invest in because they're going to be part of the workforce for many years to come is important for many policymakers. You'll also see there that we provide regions of birth, and that gives you a sense, obviously, of, you know, where to look for allies in your state. That obviously politics matters, and so working closely with groups that have some political stature in terms of representing these populations and the like, and going to legislators that that work on issues related to those communities is just a good way to gain some of the allies that can help move forward some of the arguments that you're looking to make. So in terms of the looking at Title I services, the second table in the fact sheets looks at the educational attainment of U.S. residents. This is the top sliver of that table. We specifically focus on youth, 16 to 18 and 19 to 24, because 1/3 of Title I funding under WIOA has to be spent on youth, and those youth are supposed to be predominantly those who are out of school. And so immigrant youth are twice as likely both to be not enrolled and not have a high school diploma or equivalent. And it's very interestingly, if you look at the bottom of the last line on that slide, not enrolled and employed, so many of them are in the workforce already. And so in a way, that could make them more attractive to programs, because they would potentially think, oh, well, if I'm already serving somebody who's in the workforce, then I'm not in as much danger of having that young person hurt my outcomes by not being able to meet the employment performance measures. And that, you know, very often these are young people with an extremely high motivation to work, but often also have been pushed by economic circumstances, usually into the workforce without having the underlying education that might help them really get ahead. So then looking at the educational attainment for adults, you can see that immigrants right there, the 11% versus 31%, foreign-born, meaning immigrants and refugees, are more than 3 times as likely to have less than a high school diploma or equivalent compared to the native-born population. So as you start to think about the law's provisions that say there's a priority of service for individuals who are lower educated, this begins to make more apparent that it would be a pretty good bet for folks in the adult ed field and who are looking to have immigrants and refugees have more access to the adult education and training services they need, that targeting Title I services, which are supposed to now be giving a priority for these individuals, targeting there as a place to get funding for those adult education services is something that the adult ed field isn't really used to doing. But really, that's a much bigger pot of money. It's almost 3 times as much as what the federal government provides for adult education services. So going there to try and get more of the adult education services met seems to be a pretty good bet under the law, and one that certainly is worth making arguments around. So here, the only other thing I wanted to say about this educational attainment slide is that there's a barbell, or we always talk about immigrant and refugee skills as being looking like a barbell, where there's a lot of people who are on the lower end of the educational attainment scale and an awful lot at the higher end. And what you'll see in a minute is that the focus on looking at those who are college educated is important, especially if those individuals are limited English proficient. So this is one of the more complex tables, but please bear with me in taking a look at it because it is so rich with information that you can use with policymakers. So this is a cross of limited English proficiency with educational attainment. You can see that it's the same setup comparing native born and foreign born. So first of all, that's a big number, almost 23 million limited English proficient individuals in the country. And, you know, arguably, all of them should be a priority of service under the first title of the law, since being basic skills deficient is makes one a priority of service. But then secondly, these are all the people that are in the, you know, I would say in the sea of individuals that adult education programs are attempting to serve. Then if you look here, of special concern under WIOA, given the way the performance accountability measures are set up, there'd be a particular concern that individuals who have less than a high school diploma or equivalent are perhaps or arguably more in danger of not being served by programs because they might not be able to help some of them don't have post-secondary transition as a goal. Some of them might not be in the workforce, you know, but on the flip side, these are individuals that if you applied any basic math to the Title I priority of service, they should be doubly important for serving because they have more than one of the characteristics of individuals who should be served there. Now, for all of you as adult educators also know that the system for so long has assumed that that if you're both limited English proficient and you don't have a high school diploma or equivalent, you were expected to go first for your ESL classes, then to get a GED, and then to finally enter some workforce training classes. The whole point of the law allegedly is to try and break down some of those barriers and help accelerate people towards higher value, I guess folks behind the law would say higher value educational outcomes and employer credentials and the like. But obviously you can see here that first of all, there's an awful lot of people that would be in danger of being left behind because of fears about not having individuals who could meet those requirements with just 1 year of program services. But then I would say if you look a little lower, well, sorry, not there yet, look right above where that circle is. Look how many LEP individuals 25 and older, almost 8 million, have a high school diploma or equivalent and some college or an associate's degree. So if you're in a state that's talking about doing more bridge programming or doing services that are trying to accelerate folks towards those employer recognized credentials, well, there's a huge population of better prepared or folks with more formal education who are LEP that really are prime candidates for entering into some of those programs that could really maybe have the confidence, I guess, of folks who are worried about losing their shirts potentially by providing training services to folks who might not be able to meet all the performance targets. And then finally, here's what I was talking about in the prior slide. You've got all these individuals, almost 3 million, who have a bachelor's or professional degree. And those are the folks many of us talk about where there's an issue of brain waste, that so many of them are working below what they've been trained for, largely because of a lack of ability to access professional level English classes that would help them re-enter their professions. So there is a separate table in the report that addresses that phenomenon of brain waste. Again, we have the numbers by state for you, the comparison of native versus foreign born. The real reason that I bring it up here with all of you is that these people are, I hate to say, we're not, we're really have such a dilemma about how to talk about the law, because on the one hand, we want to see everyone that can get services get high quality services. On the other hand, we feel very much on the fence about how services, about the equity concerns that are raised. So here, this population, you could imagine, would be a prime target to try and serve with integrated English language and civics funding. So the old 12% of state funding that went to EL civics classes, which used to be the more flexible money for serving parents of young children and folks who might be a little less likely to make the sort of progress that the formal part of the system wanted. That money's now flipped and is really the money that has the most demands and expectations on it. But perhaps a way to make that money go far would be to use it for individuals who have higher levels of underlying education. Those people would be more familiar also to, or have models that might be more familiar to your local workforce investment boards, who primarily still, despite the priority of service, are still framing their systems around individuals going for community college degrees and training that require them generally to be English proficient or to already have a high school diploma or equivalent. So I'll just say this last add this last little bit as a kind of navigation for what else you can find in these data resources. The national WIOA fact sheets and the state and county ones have a table about family structure, parents of young children. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, about the updated tables that we have. But basically, that table in the WIOA fact sheets talks about how parents of young children and family literacy type programs are the ones that are likely to lose the most with implementation of WIOA because of the accountability measures. We also include poverty status and health insurance coverage. Poverty status because that's another indicator under the law of service need. Insurance coverage is because it's another indicator of vulnerability economically for individuals. And then at the end of the report of the fact sheets, we go into a bit about immigration status and how it interacts with how states should think about their populations and their eligibility for services. So pretty quickly, I just wanted to point out these other fact sheets that we've recently put together that are looking, the report may be of interest to some of you because a lot of what we highlight in it in our field research are family literacy programs and the needs from a two-generation perspective, a two-generation success perspective, the needs of parents of young children for parent-facing programs that can help them navigate, understand what services might be available in their local community, and be true partners with early childhood and K-12 systems in having their children become kindergarten ready and experience educational success throughout their lives. So very interesting, I think, for all of you is, you know, obviously a lot of the point that the report makes is, look, if you really care about two-generation success, immigrant and refugee families should be a key part of the lens that you're looking at for those early childhood and adult education and workforce training services. But for purposes of WIOA, we found that foreign-born mothers were significantly more likely to be out of the labor force than native-born mothers. So our fear with seeing that was, first of all, that makes them really like an impossible bet for programs to make under WIOA, to be enrolling people who are not in the workforce and who likely would say they don't desire to be in the workforce. They're mainly coming to you for a family literacy program. Well, then that really becomes a danger for a state that's worried about suffering financial penalties for lack of performance. So we have those numbers for each of you in your states, in those 30 states. And then we also break down, you can see with this table here, that we also make the case in the report about the underlying levels of education of parents of young children who are immigrants and refugees, since the education level of parents, particularly the mother, is so closely tied to children's success in school. These are extremely policy relevant numbers for folks in the early childhood field, right? So for you who are in the adult ed field, there's so many other populations that your states might be trying to serve. But if you're talking to folks who are in the early childhood field, these numbers have a very special amount of power with them. So that the report really makes the case that we're in a lot of danger because the pathway in to longer term success services is really kind of being dismantled as a result of WIOA. And what we suggest is that folks who are very concerned about this and whose work is either exclusively in the early childhood field or in the dual generation field, that they look closely at the impact of the law and its impact on services available for lower educated immigrant and refugee parents of young children. And what we would say to all of you is that this is a primary place to look for more support for if you were a family literacy provider, or if you are trying to serve parents with young children and are finding that money for that is drying up in your state or endangered, that there are a lot of new investments being made in the early childhood space. And we think that this data, we've already seen that it's been very convincing for some states. And, not that we would say abandon the fight in trying to serve these folks under WIOA, but certainly that there are other places to look potentially for support to serve them. So then just moving towards wrapping up, I wanted to say a little bit more about some of the strategies that we've been talking and working with folks around in terms of how to respond to some of the dangers that we see under WIOA. So we lost on this in terms of trying to argue with the Obama administration that their regulations should require not just an analysis of the workforce under state plans for WIOA, but also of adult learner needs. And but this, the door is still open in many cases. There's no reason that states and localities shouldn't be using adult learner needs as they do their state and local planning. And we think if more states or localities were to recognize or be convinced by the argument that this is both the country's workforce law as well as its adult education law, so the planning should be looking in depth at adult education needs, that would put us on much stronger footing in terms of educating a lot of those who are among the decision makers about the mismatch between some of the things that are unfolding under the law and the ways that adult education is, adult learners are likely to be hurt by that. Then we also feel strongly that there should be a requirement, and many of you can just put this analysis forward, or the beginnings of this analysis forward, of who the priority of service population is for states and localities that are putting out their Title I adult training services funding, because we've seen in many states that if you were to really implement the priority of service in a state like California, you have 85 times more people who are low educated and limited English proficient than you have adult education than you have adult workforce program training slots. So you have to ask yourself, how could it be that anybody other than folks who are lack a high school diploma or equivalent or limited English proficient in many localities in particular, how could local workforce boards be serving anybody but these populations? And yet so many of them are still in the old mindset of saying, thinking that they're mainly just going to hand out individual training accounts for folks to go to community colleges where they're going to face these English proficiency and high school diploma requirements. So I think the system is in for a big shock if folks who were concerned about the needs of adult learners start to make some of those demands on Title I service providers. Not that Title I should look to Title II to fund those services, but really, why isn't Title I funding you all or adult education programs directly to be working with these populations, since they are the system's priority for service? So in a sense, you know, what we're advocating there is that we should be pushing in adult learner needs into these conversations about how Title I training dollars are spent. The other thing is, because states are going to be compared to one another, you know, in their performance and the like, it's really important that the state is collecting data that will help them justify and argue that their performance targets should be set at a level that they can truly meet them. Right now, our sense is that many states are agreeing to very high performance targets, when maybe they want to instead be arguing with the federal government that they're going to have lower performance targets for their Title II programs, for example, because they intend to serve, for example, citizenship applicants or parents of young children, so that therefore they don't expect to be meeting the employment requirements or the median wage requirements. So we feel like, you know, the law has been so confusing for many states to implement, and that some of the thinking about how to protect services for adult learner populations hasn't really been there in the ways state policymakers have been looking at this. And when I say state policymakers, you know, we would suggest that these are not necessarily even the adult ed directors in states, but actually leads of the education committees in states, or the workforce committees in states, or Latino affairs committees, et cetera, that there are a lot of state policymakers that could be very interested in these issues, and we hope that this data and your experiences will, you know, would help convince them that they need to take another look here. So the other thing, you know, I would say first of all that I want to recommend Jackie Taylor's COABE piece about what sort of advocacy folks should be using, and like advocacy strategies. And like many of you, we were on the webinar, COABE's webinar around advocacy recently. So in light of all those kinds of advocacy that so many of you are already involved in, we would say also that it's really important to be, for adult educators and programs to join broader local efforts that are going to be trying to track who's being served under Title I and Title II in their local area or in their state, that you would analyze the Title II learner profiles and try to see in program data if there are any worrying trends. Also, when you look at who has access to Title I services, especially in light of the priority of service for folks who were basic skills deficient, you know, what's going on there in terms of full implementation of the priority of service. And then also with the big changes around the integrated English language and civics education program, who's actually being served by that, and who's lost services as a result of that program being sort of turned upside down in terms of who it's meant to serve. We also think it would be very powerful to be raising up the particular challenges and losses that parent-focused programs are facing. And again, as I said earlier, to look to the early childhood field, both for allies and also for potential solutions, given that there's a lot of hard thinking going on there about how to spend early childhood funds as wisely as possible. And then finally, we've seen a state like New York, I believe, that dropped its match of Title II funds. Many of your states provide an excess match to the federal Title II dollars. And, you know, I think it's logical for states to ask themselves, well, you know, why, if this new federal performance accountability system isn't letting us serve the adult learners we mean to serve, why would we let all of our investment in adult ed be held hostage to that system? You know, we could drop down some of our formal match, 10% each year, and then maintain that money and use it in a way that we see fit, you know, that better serves our state's adult learner interest and policy needs. So I'm going to wrap there and just invite you all to, I know that we've had some questions come in, so I think we might turn it back over to Sharon and Rob to say a few words, and then Madeline and I will be back to take a whack at some of the questions you've sent in.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Margie. Excellent job. And I do want to turn this over to Robert Breitbart, our wonderful sponsor. And he'll be sharing a few more details with you while Margie and her team are looking at the questions in the chat box.
And hello, everyone. And Margie couldn't ask for a better intro into Burlington English's career pathways. What a way to maximize so many of the things you spoke about, ways that we could reach not just a few of our learners who will be going into IET programs, but really every one of the levels of our ESL learners could be getting ready for so many of those things we talked about. Some of the things that jumped out at me was not just exploration of individual careers and being primed to make good choices for IET, but also we talked about, you mentioned the brain waste in the individuals credentialed in their home countries. So we have areas such as legal, various medical, high tech, so many of the things that we find individuals coming in from other countries have credentials, accounting and engineering, so on and so forth. And this is a way, like you were talking about, to start that re-entry into their career here in their new home country. So turning it back over to Sharon and everyone, just one more time, this is a way Burlington English has projectable lessons that provide teachers an entire year's worth of in-class that can match directly to what the students are doing when they're working independently on the courseware. So it's like a career counselor sitting with them the entire time. And again, one last time, we'll see you all at burlingtonenglish.com/contact. And without further ado, thank you one more time, and I'll turn it right back over to our friends at COABE.
Wonderful. So I'm going to then turn this over to Margie and her team to answer.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to introduce you all to Madeline Morosky, who I said was on with me, and we're sitting right next to each other, even though we're in two different picture screens. So Madeline's going to take a few of the questions that came in, and then I'll take some of the other ones. So Madeline, why don't you start?
All right. Can everyone hear me? Okay. I was having some feedback. So I'm just going to start with a couple of the questions around immigration status. So I believe Margie mentioned this, but so Title I of WIOA, the workforce services, are restricted to people with U.S. work authorization. So that would include, you know, refugees, people with legal permanent resident status, green cards. All of those people are eligible for Title I services. Title I services do not extend to people without work authorization, and the programs do check that. Title II does not say anything about immigration status, so that's generally interpreted as programs they don't ask, and in general, it's not addressed. However, there are two states, Arizona and Georgia, that restrict Title II adult education services at the state level to people with U.S. work authorization. And then we got a second question about refugees. So refugees are not broken out in our analysis because the U.S. Census Bureau doesn't collect that. But if you're interested in learning more about refugees, you can look on the MPI website, and we have a number of articles that would talk about many of these same characteristics with regard to that population.
Great, thanks, Madeline. Boy, I think if all of you, I don't think all of you can see the all the comments the questions that have come in, but you know, there's a lot of worry, I think, as you know, as there should be, and I guess I would say though that despite how the law is already being implemented, I think actually that a lot of systems are circling back around to being ready to have a conversation about what it looks like the impacts of the law are going to be, and to try and figure out how to address them. So for those of you who were saying, some of you have talked about how it was difficult to even go for funding because of some of the requirements, especially it sounds like maybe some of you were more the old EL Civics programs, and that it was going to be hard for you to kind of get in there under WIOA. And I would say that, you know, first of all, there is that issue about trying to find other allies, both within your existing adult ed bureaucracy, because I think being really putting it to people with the numbers of do they mean to abandon these particular populations of learners, and if not, that they could be trying to defend your serving them just by how they negotiate their performance figures. I think that, you know, that might make some of the folks within the system feel that there is, you know, that there's more backup for trying to equitably divide up services. I also think every place we've seen people play, you know, use the equity frame and say, all right, so we know you're all working really hard to implement this law. Do you mean to also keep track of whether we're going to wind up mainly serving higher educated people who can meet the 6 performance measures while leaving behind all these other populations that we know from a public policy perspective you care about either equally or more? There is a change in the thinking. There is a real desire to look at the data and to think about how to mitigate that. And I just would say I feel so badly for everyone in the field that, you know, the adult education field has not had the investment by outside funders, foundations, in having a robust, you know, the extra money that would let folks really be engaged in policy analysis and advocacy, and that all of the educators are trying to do it in their spare time. Not that you have spare time, but that you're trying to do it without the sort of support that folks normally have to be trying to really interact in a sustained way with policymakers at the state and local level. Another question was how to guard against creaming by programs in order to keep their performance from lagging. I think that some of this is really a matter of joining broader networks or having a broader table available locally where folks are sharing what it is that what kinds of services they're actually providing, getting the list from your local WIB of who's actually, first of all, an approved training provider, where the training money is going, because in many cases that would be your evidence that there's creaming in your local area, and you could just easily bring that right back to your mayor, your county executive, your local workforce board, saying, you know, as far as we know, you're supposed to be serving folks who fall under the priority of service. And it doesn't look like, you know, even 5% of these people, 10% of these people meet the priority of service, when we have thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people who live within this catchment area who meet the priority of service. And then I think for some of you, that would also mean asking the local WIB, you know, why aren't you, you know, why can't you get directly funded to meet some of these needs? We also expect that some immigrant and refugee community organizations could start bringing forward people to the providers that are funded by Title I funds, and you know, see if they get turned around and told that they can't come into the program. There's civil rights protections in the law that say that limited English proficiency should not be a bar for folks being able to access services. So I think there's definitely a few other levers under the law that will play themselves out over the next year or two in terms of trying to push to make sure that there are more services available, whether it's from, well, particularly from Title I for folks who are limited English proficient. And, you know, our bet is that many adult education programs could start to move more towards providing services under that system. And then, Madeline, you covered, there's an awful lot of questions about do folks need to be naturalized and the like, but that's...
Yeah, so it doesn't matter if you're naturalized or not. The distinction is whether or not you have work authorization. So it's pretty logical. If you're looking for workforce services, they're going to expect that the client has work authorization, but adult education does not require that. And just to clarify real quick, we've got a question. A local WIB is the Local Workforce Investment Board, and they're the ones responsible for the Title I services.
And then we had a question about whether we had numbers specifically on refugees. Refugees aren't visible in Census Bureau data, and so no, we don't have that, but it's not hard to find state by state on the Department of State's website how many refugees are being resettled in different states around the U.S. So we'd be happy to share that with some of you. I apologize, I messed up and didn't put up our last signature slide that would give you the information for how to get in touch with me and Madeline. I assume that the website, that the PowerPoint will be available from COABE, and if not, maybe just I guess maybe give us a call here. Madeline, I'll give your number if that's okay, 202-266-1934. And then one other question was about the IELC program and how has it been turned upside down. And so the only thing I want to say, because IELC is so important, so many programs that were in particular providing parent-focused programs or citizenship-focused programs were able to do that with those funds, the 12% of funds that went into the old EL Civics program. Those were generally thought to be programs that were serving some of the kind of harder to serve or the not as academically focused adult learners. And but now under the IELCE program, since that has to be integrated with workforce training and again meet all of the 6 performance measures, it's no longer the sort of flexible funding that had been available to programs. So anyway, I think we'll leave it there, and I'm happy to finish answering some of these questions online. And please feel free to be in touch with us for a further conversation, either about efforts we might be involved in some of your states to try and help build advocacy around these issues, or about how you might want to use the numbers for the work that you're doing. Thanks, and thanks again, Sharon and COABE, for inviting us to do this.
Oh, thank you, Margie. What an excellent presentation. Thank you. And so everybody, just a reminder, you'll receive this PowerPoint in the e-blast that goes out tomorrow. It'll also be on our website, and there will be an archive. This will be archived on our website as well. So thank you all for your time. And again, thank you, Margie, and thank you, Robert. And hopefully we'll see you all in the next webinar. Bye now.
Great. Take care. Bye.